A veteran bodyguard stood in the center of an exclusive Hong Kong martial arts club, arms crossed, smirking at the slight figure across from him. Bruce Lee. The bodyguard had protected presidents, celebrities, billionaires. He'd trained in multiple combat systems, and now someone wanted him to take orders from this actor. "I don't take lessons from movie stars," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. What happened in the next 8 seconds would haunt him forever. A veteran bodyguard stood in the center of an exclusive Hong Kong martial arts club, arms crossed, smirking at the slight figure across from him. Bruce Lee. The name meant something to moviegoers, to the crowds packing theaters across Asia. But here, in this private sanctuary of real fighters, that name meant nothing to this man. The bodyguard had protected presidents during diplomatic visits. He'd shielded celebrities from assassination attempts. He'd stood between billionaires and kidnappers in situations where a single mistake meant death. He'd trained in multiple combat systems, Wing Chun in Hong Kong, boxing in Manila, military combatives in Taiwan. His body carried scars from knife attacks, bullet grazes, broken bones that had healed stronger. And now, someone wanted him to take orders from this actor. This movie star who weighed maybe 135 pounds soaking wet. This man who made his living pretending to fight on camera, with wires and stunt coordinators and multiple takes until it looked perfect. The bodyguard's smirk widened. He'd been patient through the introduction. He'd listened politely as the club owner explained that Bruce Lee would be demonstrating advanced combat principles. He'd watched Bruce enter without fanfare, carrying a small bag, looking smaller in person than he did on screen, but patience had its limits. "I don't take lessons from movie stars," he said, loud enough for everyone in the training hall to hear. Loud enough to make his position unmistakably clear. Loud enough to draw a line in the sand. The room went silent. Other bodyguards glanced at each other. Some looked uncomfortable. Others seemed curious about how this would play out. The club owner's face tightened with embarrassment, but Bruce Lee simply looked at the bodyguard. No anger in his eyes. No offense. Just a slight smile, as if he'd heard this before. As if he understood exactly what was about to happen. "That's fair," Bruce said quietly. "Would you like to test whether I have anything worth teaching?" The bodyguard's smirk never wavered. "Absolutely." What happened in the next 8 seconds would haunt him forever. Not because he was injured, not because he was humiliated, but because in 8 seconds, everything he thought he understood about combat, about expertise, about judging others, would be completely shattered. And he would spend the rest of his life grateful for it. The year was 1972. Hong Kong's Victoria Peak district housed one of Asia's most exclusive private martial arts facilities. This wasn't a public dojo, where anyone could walk in off the street and sign up for classes. This wasn't a community center offering affordable lessons to neighborhood kids. This was something else entirely. Membership cost more than most Hong Kong families earned in a year. The waiting list stretched months, sometimes years, and even if you had the money and the patience, you needed recommendations, sponsorship, proof that you belonged in these circles. The members, CEOs of multinational corporations, film producers with the power to greenlight million-dollar projects with a single phone call, government officials whose decisions affected millions of lives, and their personal security teams, the bodyguards, the protection specialists, the men whose job was to stand between their clients and danger. The training hall itself was a masterpiece of understated luxury. It stretched across polished teak floors that gleamed like mirrors under the recessed lighting. Every plank had been imported, hand-selected, fitted with the precision of fine furniture. The walls were adorned with traditional weapons, ancient Jain swords with jade, inlaid handles, staffs carved from ironwood, nunchaku that had supposedly been wielded by legendary masters centuries ago. Each piece was displayed like a museum artifact, protected behind glass, with small brass plaques explaining their historical significance. Floor-to-ceiling windows dominated the eastern wall, offering a breathtaking view of Victoria Harbor below. During daytime training sessions, natural light flooded the space. At night, the glittering lights of Hong Kong's skyline created a backdrop that reminded everyone in the room exactly what kind of world they operated in, a world of wealth, power, and influence. Everything here whispered exclusivity. The temperature was always perfectly controlled. The air carried the faint scent of sandalwood and scents. In the corner sat a small tea station with rare pu, air tea that cost more per ounce than gold. Even the training equipment, the heavy bags, the makuara striking posts, the wooden dummies, were crafted by master artisans, not mass-produced in factories. But more than the physical luxury, more than the expensive fixtures and the stunning views, this place had something more intangible and more powerful. It had culture. It had hierarchy. It had an unspoken set of rules that governed everything. See, this club wasn't just about learning martial arts. It was about status, about proving yourself among peers who'd already proven themselves elsewhere. The bodyguards who trained here weren't mall security guards or nightclub bouncers. They were elite protection specialists. Men who'd served in military special forces units, the British SAS Taiwanese Special Operations, Hong Kong's own Special Duties Unit. Men who'd studied Muay Thai at legendary camps in Thailand, learning from fighters who'd won championships in Lumpini Stadium. Men who'd traveled to Israel to study Krav Maga from instructors who'd developed the system in actual combat. Men who'd trained in boxing gyms in Manila, London, New York, sparring with professionals who fought for titles and purses. They carried themselves with the quiet confidence of people who knew violence intimately. Not the loud, aggressive posturing of insecure men trying to look tough, but the calm, measured presence of people who'd been in life or death situations and survived through skill, not luck. These men had protected diplomats during riots. They'd identified threats in crowds before those threats materialized. They'd made split-second decisions about when to engage and when to extract their clients. They'd been stabbed, shot at, attacked by multiple assailants. And they'd learned from every encounter. And they had one unspoken rule that governed everything in this training hall. Respect was earned through proven combat experience, not fame, not money, not connections, not reputation. You could be the most celebrated master in traditional kung fu circles. If you'd never been in a real fight, you were treated politely but not taken seriously. You could have a wall full of tournament trophies. If those tournaments had rules and referees and safety equipment, they were seen as sport, not combat. What mattered here was answering one question. Have you survived situations where your skill was the only thing between you and serious harm? So when Bruce Lee's name started appearing on the club's training schedule as a guest instructor, reactions were complicated. Everyone had seen the films, of course. The Big Boss had shattered box office records across Asia. Fist of Fury had people lining up around blocks to see it. Bruce Lee was becoming more than an actor. He was becoming a cultural phenomenon. His films were being credited with changing how the world saw Chinese martial arts, with giving Asian men a new kind of representation on screen, powerful, skilled, dignified. But films were films. Films used wires to make people fly through the air. Films used camera angles to make strikes look more powerful than they were. Films used stunt doubles for the dangerous sequences. Films gave you multiple takes to get it right, with directors and choreographers planning every movement in advance. This was real life. And in real life, when someone attacked you, there were no second takes, no wires, no choreography, just chaos, adrenaline, and the question of whether your training would hold up when your life depended on it. Some club members were genuinely curious about Bruce Lee. They'd heard rumors that he'd studied Wing Chun under Ip Man, one of the most respected masters in Hong Kong. They'd heard he'd been in street fights as a teenager, serious ones. They'd heard stories from people in the film industry about how Bruce did his own stunts, how he trained obsessively, how he could do things with his body that seemed physically impossible. But others were deeply skeptical. He's fast on camera, they'd say during tea breaks between training sessions. But camera speed and real speed are different things. His kicks look impressive. But would they work against someone who knows how to check a kick? He fights people who are paid to lose to him. What happens when someone isn't cooperating? Among the skeptics was a man we'll call Chen Wei. Chen Wei was 42 years old, and he looked every bit the veteran he was. Where some bodyguards were bulky with muscle, Chen was efficient, the build of someone who'd spent decades conditioning his body for function, not appearance. His forearms were thick from years of conditioning drills. His knuckles were scarred and slightly misshapen from striking hard surfaces without gloves. His hands bore small white scars from knife defense training that had gotten a bit too realistic. His face told stories without words, a small scar above his left eyebrow from a broken bottle in a Kowloon bar fight when he was 25. A slight crook in his nose from a time a protection job went sideways, and he'd taken a punch meant for his client. Weathered skin from years of standing outside in all conditions, always alert, always scanning for threats. But it was his eyes that revealed the most. They were the eyes of someone who'd seen violence and learned not to fear it, but to respect it. The eyes of someone who'd made calculations about when to fight and when to retreat, and had lived with the consequences of those decisions. Chen had trained in Wing Chun under a different lineage than Bruce Lee, spending 5 years drilling Chi Sao until his sensitivity to touch and pressure was extraordinary. He'd studied Western boxing for 3 years at a gym run by a former British military combatives instructor, learning footwork, head movement, and how to generate devastating power through proper mechanics. He'd incorporated elements of judo after a close call with a larger opponent taught him the value of throws and joint locks. More importantly, he'd been in real altercations, plural. Many he'd protected clients during riots in 1967, when Hong Kong was torn by civil unrest and anyone wealthy or connected to the government was a potential target. He'd identified and neutralized an assassination attempt on a visiting diplomat, spotting the threat before it materialized, positioning himself correctly, and ending the situation with minimal violence. He'd extracted a client from a kidnapping attempt, fighting off 3 armed attackers in a parking garage, using nothing but his skills and whatever improvised weapons he could find. These weren't sparring sessions. These weren't demonstrations. These were moments where if he'd failed, someone, possibly him, would have died. So when Chen Wei heard that Bruce Lee was coming to demonstrate techniques, his reaction was immediate and vocal. Movie star playing martial artist, he'd say to anyone who'd listen during training sessions, "I'll believe it when I see it." The man fights with choreography and camera tricks. He'd add while working the heavy bag. Put him in front of someone who isn't paid to lose, and we'll see what happens. His skepticism wasn't just about Bruce Lee personally. It was about something deeper. Chen had spent 15 years building his expertise through blood, sweat, fear, and survival. He'd earned his knowledge the hard way. The idea that someone could achieve real martial arts mastery while simultaneously building a film career, it felt wrong somehow. Like a shortcut, like confusing performance with reality. Other bodyguards in the club had mixed feelings about Chen's open disdain. Some agreed with him quietly, nodding during his monologues. Others thought he was being unnecessarily harsh. That maybe Bruce Lee had more to offer than Chen was willing to acknowledge. But everyone agreed on one thing when Bruce Lee arrived. It was going to be interesting. The club owner, a wealthy businessman named Mr. Zhao who'd studied martial arts his entire life, tried to mediate. "Chen, I respect your experience, but perhaps keep an open mind. Master Lee comes highly recommended." Chen had smiled politely. "Of course, Mr. Zhao. I'm always open to learning. But respect goes both ways. If he wants mine, he'll have to earn it like everyone else here did, through demonstration of real skill against real resistance." Mr. Zhao had sighed. He knew Chen well enough to recognize that tone. This wasn't going to be a simple demonstration. This was going to be a test, and neither man knew it yet, but that test was going to change everything. The stage was set. The culture was established. The challenge was building. All that remained was for Bruce Lee to walk through the door. Bruce Lee arrived without fanfare, no entourage of assistants carrying equipment, no cameras following him to document the session, no publicist managing his image, no handlers clearing the way or announcing his presence. Just him. He walked into the training hall wearing a simple black training outfit, loose, fitting pants and a traditional Chinese martial arts top. The kind of clothing that allowed complete freedom of movement, but had no flash, no style, no attempt to impress. He carried a small canvas bag over his shoulder, the kind that might hold a change of clothes and some personal items. Nothing more. He was smaller than people expected. In his films, Bruce Lee dominated the screen. The camera angles, the choreography, the way scenes were shot and edited, everything conspired to make him seem larger than life. But here, in person, standing in a room full of professional bodyguards, the reality was undeniable. 5'7", approximately 135 pounds. Lean, yes, obviously fit. But next to men like Chen Wei, who stood 6 feet tall and weighed 200 pounds of functional muscle, Bruce looked almost fragile. He looked like someone these bodyguards could break without much effort. Several club members noticed this immediately. The whisper started before Bruce had even set his bag down. "He's smaller than I thought. How much does he weigh?" 130. "I've protected clients bigger than him." The club's owner, Mr. Zhao, stepped forward to make introductions. He was clearly excited, honored even, to have Bruce Lee in his facility. "Gentlemen, I'm privileged to introduce Master Bruce Lee. Many of you know his work in film, but Master Lee's martial arts credentials are extensive. He studied Wing Chun under the legendary Ip Man. He's developed his own martial philosophy called Jeet Kune Do, and he's worked with fighters and martial artists across multiple disciplines. Several members bowed respectfully. Traditional etiquette, even if some of them were skeptical. In Chinese culture, you showed respect to a guest regardless of your personal feelings. Some seemed genuinely curious. A younger bodyguard who specialized in Muay Thai leaned forward slightly, interested to see what this famous actor might demonstrate. Another member, who'd read about Bruce's philosophy in a martial arts magazine, looked eager to ask questions, but others maintained their distance. Arms crossed, expressions neutral, the body language of people reserving judgment, waiting to be convinced. Chen Wei stood near the back of the group, arms folded across his chest, his expression carefully controlled. He wasn't sneering, that would be openly disrespectful. But he wasn't smiling either. He was watching, evaluating, making it clear through his posture alone that Bruce Lee would need to prove himself here. Bruce acknowledged the introduction with a slight bow. When he spoke, his voice was calm, measured, without any of the dramatic intensity he showed in films. "Thank you, Mr. Zhao. I appreciate the opportunity to share some ideas with everyone here. I understand many of you have extensive backgrounds in protection work and real-world combat. That experience is valuable, and I respect it." He set his bag down and stepped toward the center of the training floor. "I'm not here to claim I know everything. I'm not here to say my approach is the only valid one. I'm here because I've spent my life studying how human beings fight, studying the mechanics, the psychology, the principles that work regardless of style or system. And I think some of what I've learned might be useful to you." It was a humble opening, non-threatening. Bruce wasn't coming and claiming superiority. He was positioning himself as someone with ideas to share, not absolute truths to impose. But Chen Wei heard something else in those words. He heard movie star diplomacy. He heard someone trying to win over a skeptical audience with carefully chosen phrases. He heard performance. Bruce began simply. He talked about efficiency in combat, about how traditional martial arts, while beautiful and historically important, often contained unnecessary movements, flourishes that had been added over generations, techniques that worked in specific contexts but not others, forms that were more about preserving tradition than about practical effectiveness. "I have enormous respect for traditional systems," Bruce said, moving as he spoke, demonstrating small movements. "Wing Chun gave me my foundation. But I started to notice that some techniques worked in specific scenarios but failed in others. So I began asking why. What makes a technique effective? And can we extract the principle behind the technique, rather than being bound to the specific form?" He spoke about his philosophy, Jeet Kune Do, the way of the intercepting fist. About adapting, absorbing what was useful, rejecting what was useless, adding what was specifically your own. About being like water, formless, able to fit any container. Most people train in a style, Bruce explained. They become Wing Chun fighters, or karate fighters, or boxing fighters. Their identity becomes tied to their system. But what if, instead of being a style fighter, you became a fighter who used whatever principles worked for the situation at hand? It was interesting philosophy. Several members nodded along. The concepts made intellectual sense. Some of the younger bodyguards seemed engaged, leaning in, curious about where this was going. But Chen Wei had been listening for about 3 minutes, and his patience was wearing thin. Philosophy was fine. Concepts were interesting, but Chen had survived 15 years of real-world protection work. He'd made life or death decisions in fractions of seconds. He'd fought people who were trying to actually hurt him or his clients, not engage in intellectual discussions about martial arts theory. And this felt like a lecture, like something you'd hear at a university, not in a training hall full of professionals who'd proven themselves in actual combat. Chen Wei interrupted. His voice cut across the training hall, loud enough that everyone turned to look at him. "With respect, Mr. Lee," he began, and the word respect carried a weight that made it clear he wasn't sure Bruce had earned it yet. "Many of us here have backgrounds in real combat. We protect people's lives for a living. We've been in actual fights where mistakes mean death, not movie death where the director yells cut, and you do another take, but real death." The room went silent. The kind of silence that happens when someone has just said what everyone was thinking, but no one else had the courage to voice out loud. Bruce turned, his expression neutral, and looked at Chen Wei. He didn't seem offended, just attentive, like he was genuinely listening to what Chen had to say. Chen continued, emboldened by Bruce's lack of defensive reaction. What you're describing sounds interesting for films. It sounds like good philosophy. But how does it work against someone who's trained to hurt people? Against someone who isn't cooperating with your choreography? Against someone who's bigger, stronger, the fighting for real? The challenge was clear. Chen wasn't being openly hostile, but he also wasn't being subtle. He was essentially saying, prove it. Other bodyguards glanced at each other. Some looked uncomfortable, embarrassed by Chen's directness. Others seemed curious, even eager, to see how Bruce would respond to such a direct challenge to his credibility. The club owner, Mr. Zhao, stepped forward, his face flushed with embarrassment. Chen, perhaps we should, but Bruce raised a hand, gently stopping Mr. Zhao mid-sentence. The gesture was calm, almost casual. No, it's fine, Bruce said. It's a fair question. Very fair question, actually. He turned his full attention to Chen Wei, studying him for a moment, not with anger, not with wounded pride, with genuine interest, as if Chen had just asked something worth thinking about carefully. Tell me, Bruce said, his tone conversational. How long have you been training? Chen straightened slightly, pride evident in his posture. 15 years of real-world application, he responded. His emphasis on real-world was deliberate, not choreographed movie fights, not demonstrations with cooperative partners. Real situations where if I failed, people died. The distinction was clear. Chen was drawing a line between what he did, protection work that involved actual danger, and what he believed Bruce did, which was performance. The insult was unmistakable. Several people in the room tensed. The younger Muay Thai bodyguard winced slightly. Mr. Zhao looked mortified, clearly worried that this was going to escalate into something that would embarrass everyone involved. But Bruce didn't look offended. Instead, he smiled. Just slightly, not mockingly. Almost appreciatively. Like he'd just encountered something interesting. I appreciate your experience, Bruce said, and his voice remained even, almost friendly. There was no sarcasm, no passive-aggressive undertone. He seemed genuinely sincere. And you're absolutely right to be skeptical. In your position, I would be too. This caught Chen slightly off guard. He'd expected defensiveness, maybe anger, perhaps an attempt to pull rank based on fame. He hadn't expected agreement. Bruce continued. You've spent 15 years proving yourself in real situations. That's valuable. That's real. And I understand that from your perspective. Someone who makes movies might not seem credible. I get that. I really do. He paused, let that sink in. Then. But perhaps we could explore this practically rather than theoretically. Chen's eyes narrowed slightly. What do you mean? I'm suggesting a simple demonstration, Bruce said. You try to hit me. Full speed, full power. Any technique you choose, punch, kick, whatever you think will work. If you can land a clean strike, you'll have your answer about whether what I'm teaching works in real combat. Murmurs rippled through the room. This was unexpected. Bruce Lee was essentially offering himself as a target to one of the club's most experienced fighters. He was volunteering to be tested, to have his skills validated or exposed in front of everyone. Chen Wei studied Bruce's face, looking for signs of bravado, false confidence, the kind of ego that made people overestimate their abilities. But Bruce's expression was calm, open. He genuinely seemed to believe this was a reasonable proposal. And if I hurt you? Chen asked. If I break that movie star face? If I land a strike that puts you on the ground? It was both a practical question and another insult. Chen was implying that Bruce's face was his livelihood, that he was more concerned with appearance than with actual fighting ability. Bruce's expression didn't change. Then you'll have proven your point that my approach doesn't work against real fighters. I'll apologize for wasting everyone's time and I'll leave. Simple as that. The challenge hung in the air like smoke. Chen Wei looked around the room. Everyone was watching now. Every bodyguard, every club member, even Mr. Zhao, despite his obvious discomfort. This had become more than a demonstration. It had become a test of credibility, of reality versus reputation, of proven experience versus theoretical philosophy. Chen had essentially painted himself into a corner. He'd challenged Bruce Lee's credentials publicly. He'd questioned whether film fighting had any connection to real combat. And now Bruce had offered him the chance to prove his point. If Chen backed down now, he'd look like all talk. His own credibility among his peers would be damaged. But if he accepted and couldn't land a strike, if Bruce made him look foolish, no, that wouldn't happen. Chen had 15 years of experience. He'd fought real opponents in real situations. Bruce Lee was a movie star, smaller, lighter, and probably accustomed to fighting stunt men who were paid to lose. Chen Wei made his decision. "All right, Mr. Lee," he said, and there was an edge to his voice now. Professional pride had been engaged. "Let's see what you've got." Bruce nodded once, his expression still calm. "Thank you for being willing to test this. I think everyone will learn something valuable." They began moving toward the center of the training floor, and the atmosphere in the room shifted completely. What had started as a philosophical discussion was about to become physical. Everyone formed a loose circle around the two men, giving them space but staying close enough to see everything clearly. This was no longer a lecture. This was a challenge. And everyone in that room knew they were about to witness something they'd remember for the rest of their lives. They moved to the center of the training floor, their footsteps echoing slightly on the polished teak. Other club members shifted positions, forming a loose circle around them. Nobody was smiling now. The earlier atmosphere of polite curiosity had evaporated completely, replaced by something much more intense. This was no longer a demonstration or a lecture. This was a challenge, a test, a moment where reputations would be validated or destroyed. The younger bodyguards pressed closer, eager to see what would happen. The veterans hung back slightly, arms crossed, faces unreadable. They'd seen challenges before. They knew how these situations could escalate, how ego and adrenaline could turn a simple demonstration into something dangerous. Mr. Zhao stood off to the side, his face creased with worry. This wasn't what he'd envisioned when he'd invited Bruce Lee to the club. He'd imagined an inspiring session, perhaps some philosophy, maybe a few techniques demonstrated on willing volunteers. Not this. Not a direct confrontation between his most skeptical member and his honored guest. Chen Wei rolled his shoulders, bouncing slightly on the balls of his feet. This wasn't posturing, it was preparation. He was a professional, and professionals had routines. He was loosening his muscles, activating his nervous system, getting his body ready for explosive movement. He circled slowly to his right, and Bruce turned with him, maintaining distance. Chen was assessing angles, looking for openings, running through possible attacks in his mind. Should he start with hands or feet, high or low, a feint followed by a real attack, or just commit fully to a single devastating strike? Chen had done this hundreds of times, sized up opponents, calculated risks, chosen tactics. He was good at it. It was one of the reasons he'd survived 15 years in a profession where mistakes were measured in blood and broken bones. But something about Bruce's posture was strange. Bruce simply stood there, relaxed, hands at his sides, weight distributed evenly on both feet. He wasn't in a fighting stance. No lead leg forward, no guard up, no visible tension in his body that would indicate readiness to defend or attack. To anyone watching, Bruce looked completely unprepared. He looked like someone who didn't understand what was about to happen. He looked vulnerable. And that unsettled Chen more than any aggressive stance would have. "Are you ready?" Chen asked, and there was a hint of mockery in his voice. He couldn't help it. The sight of Bruce just standing there, hands down, looking almost casual, it felt disrespectful, like Bruce wasn't taking this seriously, like he thought Chen wasn't a real threat. Bruce nodded once. "Whenever you are." Chen circled more, watching for any change in Bruce's posture, any tell that would indicate preparation. But Bruce just turned with him, maintaining the same relaxed stance. His hands stayed at his sides. His expression remained calm, almost meditative. This infuriated Chen more than any insult could have. In combat, there's a language of respect. You acknowledge your opponent's capability by taking them seriously, by preparing properly, by showing that you recognize they could hurt you if you're not careful. The complete lack of defensive posture from Bruce felt like a statement. "You're not dangerous enough for me to bother guarding against." "Put your hands up," Chen said, and now there was an edge of genuine anger in his voice. "I don't want anyone saying I had an unfair advantage. I don't want anyone claiming you weren't ready when I hit you." Bruce smiled slightly. Just a small curve at the corner of his mouth. Not mocking, almost gentle. "My hands are exactly where they need to be." That was it. That was the final straw. Chen had had enough of the philosophy, the calm demeanor, the apparent disrespect. He was a trained fighter. He'd spent 15 years becoming dangerous. He knew how to set up attacks, how to create openings, how to read opponents and exploit their weaknesses. But something about Bruce's absolute stillness was deeply unsettling. It was like preparing to strike a statue that might suddenly come to life. There was no nervous energy, No anticipation, no visible preparation. Just presence. Chen made his decision. He would use a combination he'd employed successfully in real confrontations. A quick jab to draw the guard up, followed immediately by a powerful right cross aimed at the body, finishing with a low kick to the lead leg. 3 strikes, full power, professional execution. The jab would make most people raise their hands defensively, opening the body. The cross would exploit that opening, and the low kick would damage the leg regardless of what happened with the first 2 strikes. It was a smart combination. Proven. Effective against trained fighters. Chen set his weight, measured the distance one final time, and launched the attack. His jab snapped out fast, sharp, aimed directly at Bruce's face. In a real fight, this punch alone could break a nose, close an eye, create the stunning effect needed to land the follow-up strikes. And that's when reality shifted. Bruce's movement was so minimal it almost didn't look like movement at all. His head angled maybe 2 inches to the side. Just 2 inches. The jab passed through empty air so close to Bruce's face that Chen could have sworn it should have connected. The distance looked impossible. The timing looked impossible. But the punch found nothing but air. Chen had already committed to the combination, though. Muscle memory had taken over. His body was executing a sequence that had been drilled thousands of times. His right cross came thundering toward Bruce's ribs, with every ounce of power Chen could generate, his hip rotation, his shoulder drive, his entire body weight moving through his fist. This punch had cracked ribs before. This punch had ended fights. This punch carried 15 years of conditioning and real-world application. Bruce's forearm appeared. Not blocking. Blocking would have meant meeting force with force, absorbing impact. Instead, Bruce's arm moved at an angle, making contact with Chen's wrist just as the punch was reaching maximum extension. The touch was light, almost gentle, but it redirected the entire force of Chen's strike. Chen felt his own power get channeled harmlessly past Bruce's body. It was like throwing a punch at water. There was nothing there to hit, and somehow his force just flowed around the target. His brain was still processing what had just happened when his body completed the combination. The low kick was already in motion, traveling toward Bruce's lead leg. This was a fundamental attack. You can't dodge a low kick the same way you dodge a punch. The leg is too big a target. The kick is too fast. You either check it, absorb it, or you get hit. Bruce lifted his foot approximately 3 inches off the ground. The kick whistled underneath it, finding nothing but air. Chen stumbled slightly, his momentum carrying him past the point where Bruce had been. He caught himself, reset his stance, breathing harder now than when he'd started. 3 strikes. Full power, professional execution, combat proven technique, 0 contact. The room was completely silent. Not even the sound of breathing. Everyone was frozen, trying to process what they'd just witnessed. Chen looked at Bruce, who stood in almost exactly the same position as before. Bruce hadn't moved more than 6 inches in any direction. His hands were still at his sides. His expression remained calm, almost meditative. He wasn't breathing hard, wasn't showing any signs of exertion, looked exactly as relaxed as he had before Chen attacked. "Try again," Bruce said simply. His voice was gentle, encouraging even, like a teacher inviting a student to keep practicing. Chen's professional pride was now fully engaged. The anger from earlier had transformed into something more focused. This wasn't about ego anymore. This was about understanding. Chen needed to know if what just happened was luck, if he'd somehow telegraphed his intentions too obviously, if there was a reasonable explanation for how Bruce had made 3 solid strikes miss. He abandoned the combination approach this time. Combinations could be predictable if you'd seen them before. Instead, Chen decided to throw single committed strikes, the kind that ended street fights. No setup. No feinting. Just pure explosive power aimed at a target. He threw a straight right punch aimed directly at Bruce's face. Not a jab, a full power cross. The kind of punch where you put everything behind it, where you're fully committed to landing it, or creating enough force that even a partial block does damage. He threw it from optimal range. Perfect mechanics, hip rotation, shoulder drive, his entire body weight moving through his fist toward Bruce's face. Bruce's head wasn't there, not a dramatic duck. Not a big evasive movement, just the space where Chen's fist arrived wasn't occupied by Bruce's face anymore. The punch cut through air, and Chen felt the horrible sensation of overextension, that moment when you've committed fully to a strike and missed, leaving you temporarily off balance. He reset, adjusted his distance, and threw a roundhouse kick. This was a technique he'd practiced 10,000 times. The kick was powered by his hip rotation, aimed at Bruce's midsection. It had enough force to crack ribs if it landed cleanly. Bruce's body angled, maybe 30 degrees. Chen's shin passed through the space where Bruce's torso had been a fraction of a second earlier. The kick found nothing but air. Chen was breathing hard now. Actually hard. He'd thrown 7 full power strikes, 7 in under 20 seconds. Each one had been thrown with real intent, with the kind of commitment you use when you genuinely need to hit something. Not a single one had connected, and Bruce hadn't thrown a counter strike, hadn't tried to hurt him, hadn't even touched him except for that light redirect on his cross, had barely moved at all. This wasn't possible. Chen had sparred with kickboxers who'd won tournaments. He'd trained with wrestlers who could ragdoll people twice their size. He'd exchanged techniques with karat black belts, Wing Chun masters, Muay Thai fighters with dozens of professional bouts. Nobody moved like this. Nobody made trained, committed attacks looked this ineffective without even trying to hit back. Chen threw 2 more strikes. A left hook followed immediately by a right uppercut. Both missed. Bruce slipped the hook by turning his shoulder, and the uppercut found only air as Bruce's chin pulled back just enough to be out of range. 9 strikes now. 9 full power, committed techniques from a professional bodyguard with 15 years of real-world experience. 0 contact. Chen stopped, his chest heaving, sweat beginning to form on his forehead. He stared at Bruce, who stood there with his hands still at his sides, not even breathing hard. Bruce looked exactly as fresh as when they'd started. Like the last 30 seconds of intense combat hadn't even happened. And that's when Chen saw it in Bruce's eyes, not mockery, not arrogance, not satisfaction at making Chen look foolish. Something worse, patience. Bruce was being patient with him. Like a teacher waiting for a student to understand a concept. Like someone who knew how this was going to end, and was simply giving Chen time to arrive at that understanding himself. And Chen had absolutely no idea what that understanding was supposed to be. His worldview was beginning to crack. Everything he thought he knew about fighting, about combat effectiveness, about what was possible, all of it was being challenged by the simple reality of what he was experiencing. Bruce Lee hadn't hurt him, hadn't humiliated him in any obvious way, hadn't thrown strikes or used superior strength or speed. He'd simply existed in spaces that Chen's attacks couldn't reach, and somehow, that was more devastating than any counter strike could have been. The other bodyguards in the room exchanged glances. What they were witnessing didn't align with their understanding of combat. When someone attacked you, really attacked you with commitment and power, you had options. You could block, absorbing the impact with your arms or legs. You could parry, deflecting the strike away from your body. You could counter-strike, accepting that you might take a hit while delivering one of your own. You could clinch, closing distance to neutralize the attack. You could retreat, creating space to reset. These were the fundamental responses to aggression. Every martial art taught variations of these principles. Every combat system in the world was built on some combination of these defensive strategies. But what Bruce was doing didn't fit into any of those categories. He wasn't blocking, there was no impact, no force meeting force. He wasn't parrying in any conventional sense. There was barely any contact with Chen's strikes. He wasn't counter-attacking, he wasn't clinching, and he wasn't really retreating, because he was moving such minimal distances. He was simply not being where the attacks arrived. It was like watching someone navigate through a rainstorm without getting wet. The strikes were there. Everyone could see them, hear the rush of air as punches and kicks passed by. But somehow Bruce existed in the gaps between them. One of the senior members, a former British SAS operator who'd served in conflicts across 3 continents, whispered to the club owner, his voice barely audible. "Is he using some kind of technique we don't know? Some secret Wing Chun method?" The owner, Mr. Zhao, who had studied martial arts for 30 years under multiple masters, who held ranks in 3 different systems, who had devoted his life to understanding combat, shook his head slowly. His expression was one of awe mixed with confusion. "I don't think it's a technique," Mr. Zhao whispered back. I think it's just understanding distance and timing at a level most of us never reach. He's not doing anything fancy. He's just perfectly aware of where Chen's attacks are going before they get there." "That shouldn't be possible." The SAS veteran muttered. "I know." Back in the circle, Chen Wei was reassessing. His chest was heaving now, his breathing labored. 9 full power strikes in less than a minute was taxing, especially when you were putting everything behind each one. But more than physical exhaustion, Chen was experiencing something he hadn't felt in years: genuine confusion. His professional training kicked in. When direct attacks aren't working, you change approach. You adapt. You find a different angle, a different strategy. Chen began feinting. He threw a high kick but stopped at mid-motion, pulling it back, expecting Bruce to react defensively so Chen could counter whatever defense Bruce showed. It was a smart tactic. Make your opponent commit to defending against a fake attack, then punish their commitment with a real one. But Bruce didn't react. He just watched the kick stop, his expression neutral, and then watched Chen's leg resettle into stance. Bruce's eyes tracked the movement with what looked like mild interest, but his body didn't respond at all. He didn't flinch, didn't shift weight, didn't raise a guard. It was as if Bruce had known the kick was a feint before Chen had even thrown it. Chen tried again. A feinted jab, hoping to get Bruce to move his head so Chen could throw a real cross to wherever Bruce's head moved. But again, Bruce didn't respond to the feint. Just watched it happen. Like watching a video of someone punching, rather than actually being threatened by one. This was psychologically unnerving. One of the fundamentals of feinting is that it exploits the opponent's instinct to defend themselves. Everyone has a flinch response. Everyone has that micro-reaction to perceived threats. You could train to minimize it, but you couldn't eliminate it completely. Except apparently Bruce Lee could. Chen changed tactics again. If Bruce wouldn't react to feints, maybe overwhelming pressure would work. Chen rushed forward with aggression and volume, a barrage of punches, using forward pressure to crowd Bruce's space, to force him to give ground or get hit. Left hook, right cross, left uppercut, right hook, another left cross. 5 punches in rapid succession, each one thrown with intent, creating a wall of force that should be impossible to slip through. Bruce moved backward. But it wasn't retreating, not in the traditional sense of backing away from danger. It was spacing. Bruce's steps backward were perfectly timed, perfectly measured. Each of Chen's punches missed by the smallest margins imaginable, an inch here, 2 inches there. And somehow, despite the aggressive forward pressure, Bruce was never where the next punch arrived. It was like trying to catch smoke with your bare hands. Chen's combination ended with him 3 steps, deeper into the training hall than where he'd started, breathing hard, arms heavy from throwing so many strikes. Bruce stood there, calm, centered, looking like he'd just finished a light warm-up rather than defending against an aggressive assault from a trained fighter. 5 minutes had passed since they'd started, maybe closer to 6. Chen had thrown maybe 30 or 40 strikes by now. The exact count was becoming hard to track. His arms were getting heavy. Each punch was requiring more effort to generate the same speed and power. Sweat dripped from his face, staining the collar of his training outfit. And Bruce looked exactly as fresh as when they'd started. Not a drop of sweat. Not a sign of elevated breathing. Not even a hair out of place. "You're fast," Chen said, his voice strained by exertion. It wasn't a compliment, it was an attempt to understand, to categorize what was happening into something that made sense. "I'll give you that." Bruce shook his head slightly. The gesture was gentle, almost apologetic, as if he was sorry to correct Chen but felt it was necessary. "I'm not being fast," Bruce said. His voice was calm, conversational, like they were discussing philosophy over tea, rather than in the middle of a physical confrontation. "You're telegraphing your intentions before you move. Your shoulder drops a fraction of a second before you punch. Your weight shifts before you kick. Your eyes focus on the target you're about to hit. You're having a conversation with your body before you attack. And I'm simply reading what you're about to say." This statement cut deeper than any physical strike could have, because Chen realized, with horrible clarity, that it was true. Every movement he'd learned, every technique he'd drilled thousands of times until it became muscle memory. Every combination that had been beaten into his nervous system through repetition, all of it followed patterns, mechanical patterns, predictable sequences. His body announced its intentions before executing them. The slight tensing of muscles before explosive movement. The micro-adjustments in weight distribution before changing levels. The way his eyes would lock onto a target a split second before his limbs moved toward it. He'd never noticed these tells before, because most opponents didn't operate at a level of awareness to perceive them. But to someone who understood the mechanical patterns of human combat at Bruce's level, Chen was essentially announcing each attack before throwing it. It was like playing poker against someone who could see all your cards. Another bodyguard stepped forward. He was younger than Chen, maybe early 30s, with a lean, wiry build that spoke of endurance rather than power. This one was trained in Muay Thai. He'd fought in underground tournaments in Bangkok, won most of them. He had the confidence of someone who'd tested himself against resisting opponents and emerged victorious more often than not. "May I try?" he asked. His voice was respectful, but there was eagerness in it. He wanted to test himself against this phenomenon he was witnessing. Bruce nodded, not even breathing hard despite what had just happened with Chen. Of course, the Muay Thai fighter approached with a completely different energy than Chen had shown. Where Chen had been methodical and somewhat angry, this fighter was aggressive from the start. He came at Bruce with the relentless, high-volume attack style that characterized Thai boxing: low kicks to the legs, punches to create openings, elbows at close range, knees when the distance closed. It was a style built on pressure on volume, on breaking opponents through sheer relentless forward momentum. The first low kick came fast and hard, aimed at Bruce's lead leg. These kicks were designed to accumulate damage over time, to deaden the leg muscles, to compromise mobility and stance. Bruce checked it, lifted his shin to meet the kick, absorbing it on the hardest part of his leg. This was conventional defense, but the timing was perfect. The check happened at exactly the right moment, with exactly the right angle, so that the Muay Thai fighter felt like he'd kicked a steel post. The fighter reset and came forward again. A 3-punch combination: jab, cross, hook, followed by another low kick. Fast, technical, the kind of combination that landed on opponents in under 5 seconds in the ring. Bruce slipped the jab, angled away from the cross, let the hook pass over his shoulder as he ducked slightly, and lifted his leg to check the kick. The entire sequence took maybe 2 seconds, and the Muay Thai fighter hadn't landed a single clean shot. But the fighter was experienced. He didn't get frustrated. He just kept coming. That was the Muay Thai way: relentless pressure, constant attack, break the opponent through volume and persistence. Low kick. Punches. Bruce slipped. Elbow strike at close range. Bruce wasn't there anymore. He'd created a few inches of space that made the elbow miss by a fraction. 30 seconds passed. Then a minute. The Muay Thai fighter was good. He was landing combinations on most opponents within 5 or 10 seconds normally. His style was built on overwhelming people before they could establish their rhythm. But against Bruce, nothing was landing. Every low kick was checked perfectly. Every punch slipped by minimal margins. Every elbow found empty air. Every attempted knee strike failed to connect, because Bruce controlled the distance so precisely that the fighter couldn't generate power. The fighter stopped, chest heaving. He'd been attacking continuously for over a minute of aggressive, high-volume striking. In a normal fight, that much offensive output should have ended things one way or another. But he hadn't landed a single clean strike. The fighter bowed respectfully, deeply. "I understand now," he said, his voice carrying genuine awe. "You're not fighting back because you don't need to. You're just showing us the level of awareness that's possible." Bruce returned the bow. "You're very skilled. Your technique is excellent. But yes, the point I'm trying to demonstrate is about perception and awareness more than about physical technique." A third bodyguard stepped forward. Then a fourth. Each one bringing their specialty, their background, their unique approach to combat. The third was a judo practitioner, a heavyweight, maybe 240 pounds, who specialized in throws and takedowns. He shot for Bruce's legs, trying to use his superior size and grappling skill to get Bruce to the ground where weight would matter more than striking. Bruce sprawled perfectly, legs shooting back, hips dropping, hands posting on the grappler's shoulders. The timing was immaculate. Then, while the grappler was still committed to the failed takedown, Bruce's hand moved toward the back of his neck, not striking, just touching, showing where a strike could have landed. "Here," Bruce said simply. If this were real, this would end it. The fourth bodyguard was a Wing Chun practitioner from a different lineage than Bruce, someone who specialized in trapping hands in close, range combat. He tried to trap Bruce's arms, to control the space between them, to use the sticky hand sensitivity that Wing Chun was famous for. But Bruce's arms weren't where they were expected to be. The trapping sequences found nothing to trap, and within seconds, Bruce had reversed the position, his hands resting lightly on the Wing Chun practitioner's arms, controlling the center line completely. "Feel that?" Bruce asked. "Your structure is compromised from here. 5 targets are now open." One by one, the bodyguards were being given the same lesson Chen had received. Each one brought their best techniques, their trained responses, their years of experience. And each one discovered the same frustrating reality. Bruce Lee operated at a level of awareness and understanding that made their movements predictable. Their attacks telegraphed, their defenses inadequate. But here's what was really happening in that room. Beyond the physical demonstrations, these bodyguards were having their professional identities challenged at the deepest level. They'd built careers around being elite fighters. They'd built reputations. They'd built self-images. Being good at combat wasn't just what they did, it was who they were. And this small man who made movies was demonstrating, patiently and without malice, that everything they thought they knew about fighting was incomplete, not wrong, not worthless, but incomplete. Some of the bodyguards watching were angry. You could see it in their clenched jaws, their folded arms, the way they looked away when another colleague failed to land a strike. Their anger wasn't really directed at Bruce. It was directed at the situation, at the uncomfortable realization that they might not be as advanced as they'd believed. Others were fascinated. They leaned forward, watching every micro-movement, trying to decode what Bruce was doing, trying to understand the principles behind the technique. These were the students, the ones whose curiosity was stronger than their ego. A few looked genuinely disturbed. Their faces showed something close to existential crisis. If their understanding of combat was this limited, what else did they not know? How many fights had they won through luck, or inferior opposition rather than true skill? The questions were uncomfortable, and you could see them struggling with those thoughts in real time. Chen Wei stood off to the side now, watching his colleagues experience the same confusion and frustration he'd just gone through. The anger was draining away from him, replaced by something more complex and harder to name. Confusion, yes. He'd thought he understood fighting, and now that understanding seemed incomplete. Curiosity. How was Bruce doing this? What level of training, what depth of understanding, did it take to operate at this level? And something else. Something uncomfortable and humbling. The slow, creeping recognition that he'd been arrogant about something he didn't fully understand. That his 15 years of experience, while valuable and real, represented one level of expertise, and that there were levels beyond it he hadn't even known existed. It was the feeling of a black belt discovering there were colors beyond black. The feeling of someone who'd climbed to the top of a mountain, only to discover that mountain was actually a foothill, and there were peaks beyond it that touched the clouds. "All right," Chen said, his voice carrying across the training hall. Everyone turned to look at him. He stepped forward again, and this time his expression was completely different. No anger, no skepticism. Just honest, open curiosity. "I was disrespectful," Chen said, speaking directly to Bruce. The admission cost him something, pride, ego, the image he cultivated. But he said it anyway. "I apologize. I judged you based on your profession rather than your skill. That was wrong of me." Bruce looked at him for a long moment. "Thank you for saying that. But you weren't entirely wrong to be skeptical." Chen looked surprised. "I mean it," Bruce continued. "Healthy skepticism is essential in martial arts. If you just accepted everything I said because I'm famous, because I make movies, that would have been just as flawed as rejecting everything I said for the same reasons. The problem wasn't your skepticism. It was how you expressed it, and more importantly, whether you were willing to test your assumptions when challenged." Chen nodded slowly, absorbing that. "But I need to understand," Chen said. "What are you doing that we're not? What's the difference between what we know and what you know?" Bruce looked at him thoughtfully. "You want to understand?" "Yes." "Genuinely, then attack me again. But this time, pay attention to what you're feeling before you move. Don't just throw the technique. Notice the thought that becomes the intention that becomes the movement. Watch that entire chain as it happens inside you." Chen took his stance again. He was tired now, genuinely fatigued, but he was also intensely focused. This wasn't about proving anything anymore. This was about learning. He threw a straight right punch, not his hardest, not his fastest, but thrown with awareness, trying to observe himself while doing it, and he felt it. The slight tension in his shoulder before his arm extended. The minute shift in his weight from his back foot to his front foot. The preparatory breath his body took right before the explosive movement, his eyes locking onto the target a fraction of a second before his fist moved toward it. His body was announcing his attack before it happened. Every single time. He'd just never been aware of it before because no opponent had ever been perceptive enough to read those signals. You felt it, Bruce said. It wasn't a question. He could see the recognition in Chen's eyes. Chen nodded slowly, his hand still extended in the air from the punch that had, once again, found nothing but empty space. That gap between intention and action. Bruce continued, that's where most fights are won or lost. Most people fight unconsciously. They let their training run on automatic. They learn a technique, drill it until it becomes muscle memory, and then they stop thinking about it. They just do it. He paused, making sure Chen was following. But fighting unconsciously means you're predictable. Your patterns can be read. Your intentions can be seen before you execute them. Someone who fights consciously, who can perceive that gap in their opponent and eliminate it in themselves. Bruce didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The implication was clear. Someone who could do that would operate at a completely different level than everyone else. The room had gone completely quiet. Even the ambient sounds seemed to have faded away. These hard men, these professionals who'd spent careers perfecting violence, who'd built identities around being dangerous, were suddenly students again. And the lesson they were learning had nothing to do with specific techniques or styles. It was about awareness, about consciousness, about the difference between training your body and training your mind to perceive reality at a deeper level. And nobody had even been hit yet. That was perhaps the most remarkable thing. Bruce had demonstrated complete martial dominance without landing a single strike, without causing any pain, without any violence at all. He'd shown them something more profound than superior technique. He'd shown them a level of understanding they hadn't known existed. Would you like to see what's possible when you eliminate that gap? Bruce asked the room. His voice was quiet, but in the silence of the training hall, every word carried clearly. It wasn't a challenge. It wasn't boasting. It was a genuine question, offered with the same tone a teacher might use when asking students if they wanted to see the next step in a demonstration. Everyone nodded. Some eagerly, leaning forward with visible curiosity. Others more cautiously, still processing everything they'd witnessed so far. But everyone wanted to see. The energy in the room had completely transformed over the past 15 minutes. The skepticism had burned away like morning fog under sunlight, replaced by genuine curiosity and the uncomfortable excitement of people who were about to learn something that would change how they understood their craft. Bruce turned to Chen Wei. Attack me one more time. Full commitment, don't hold anything back. Don't preserve energy. Just give me the best, most committed strike you have left. Chen had gasped out somewhat. His arms felt heavy, his legs were beginning to burn from all the explosive movements, and his cardiovascular system was working hard to keep up with the demands he'd been placing on it. But he gathered himself, took a deep breath, reset his mental state. This time there was no ego involved. No anger. No need to prove himself. Just a clean intention, throw the best technique he could manage and see what Bruce would do with it. He set his stance, measured the distance carefully, and threw a straight right punch with everything he had left. Perfect mechanics. Hip rotation driving through his shoulder driving through his fist. The kind of punch that carried his full body weight, the kind that had ended confrontations before. What happened next? Everyone would remember for the rest of their lives. Bruce didn't move defensively. Instead, he moved forward, into the punch, toward the danger rather than away from it. This violated every instinct most fighters had. When someone throws a committed strike at your face, you move away from it, or you block it, or you slip to the side. You don't move toward it. That's how you get knocked out. But Bruce moved forward with perfect timing, perfect precision. His left hand came up, not to block, but to intercept Chen's wrist just as the punch was reaching full extension. The contact was so light it barely qualified as a touch. Just his fingertips against Chen's wrist, but positioned at exactly the right angle, at exactly the right moment in the punch's trajectory. That minimal touch redirected Chen's entire arm, not by meeting force with force, but by understanding the geometry of the movement, so perfectly that a small input at the right point could change the entire vector of the attack. Chen's punch, which had been aimed directly at Bruce's face with devastating power behind it, slid harmlessly past Bruce's head, maybe 3 inches away from contact. Simultaneously, in the same fluid motion, so coordinated that it was impossible to tell which happened first, Bruce's right hand extended in a straight line toward Chen's face. The motion took maybe a quarter of a second from start to finish. One smooth, efficient movement that accomplished multiple objectives: defense, positioning, an attack, all integrated into a single action. Bruce's fist stopped 1 inch from Chen's nose, frozen there, perfectly still, close enough that Chen could feel the displacement of air, close enough that he could focus his eyes on Bruce's knuckles and see every detail clearly, but not touching, not making contact. Chen's eyes went wide. He couldn't help it. Having a fist appear 1 inch from your face with that kind of speed and precision triggered something primal in the nervous system, something that bypassed conscious thought and went straight to the fear response. He was completely frozen. Not because Bruce was holding him. Bruce wasn't touching him except for that light contact on his wrist. But because Chen's position was so thoroughly compromised that his body instinctively recognized there was no good move available. Bruce spoke, his hand still extended, his fist still hovering 1 inch from Chen's nose. Feel where you are right now. Don't move. Just notice your position. Chen was breathing shallowly, his heart pounding, but he forced himself to assess his situation objectively, professionally. Your weight is forward. Bruce continued, his voice calm, almost gentle, like a doctor explaining an X-ray to a patient. You committed fully to that punch, which means your center of gravity is beyond your front foot. You're balanced on a knife edge right now. It was true. Chen could feel it. One small push and he would stumble forward. Your punching arm is overextended. Bruce continued. It's past the point of maximum power. You can't pull it back quickly, and you can't generate force with it from this position. It would take you almost a full second to reset to a position where that arm is useful again. Chen tried to move his arm experimentally and realized Bruce was right. The arm felt heavy, awkward, out of position. Your opposite hand is out of position. Bruce went on. Look at where your left hand is. It's down by your hip, nowhere near your center line. If I retracted my right hand and struck with my left, you couldn't block or parry in time. Your guard has completely collapsed. Chen glanced down and saw his left hand hanging uselessly at his side, too far away from his face to protect anything. Your center line is completely exposed. Bruce said, look at where my body is positioned relative to yours. I'm at an angle. I can see all of your vital targets clearly, throat, solar plexus, ribs, groin. But you can't see mine. My shoulder is blocking your line of sight to most of my body. Chen shifted his eyes without moving his head, and realized this was also true. Bruce's body was angled in a way that protected his vital areas while leaving Chen's completely open. From this position, Bruce continued, and now his free left hand began to move, slowly, deliberately, hovering over different points on Chen's body. I have 6 targets I could strike before you could recover. Watch. His left hand moved to hover just in front of Chen's throat. Your neck, throat strike, ends consciousness in seconds, possibly permanently damages the trachea. The hand moved down. Your solar plexus. This nerve cluster, if struck correctly, can stop the diaphragm, make breathing impossible temporarily. Lower. Your floating ribs. These aren't protected by the ribcage structure. A sharp strike here causes intense pain and potential organ damage. Lower still. Your groin. Obvious target, obviously devastating. The hand moved to Chen's knee. Your knee joint. From this angle, a strike to the inside or outside of your knee with proper force can cause serious structural damage. Finally, Bruce's hand hovered over Chen's foot. You're in step. The small bones here break easily. A stomp from this position would compromise your mobility for weeks. As Bruce named each target, Chen felt the presence of each potential strike. Not threatening, Bruce wasn't trying to intimidate him, but educational, showing him in explicit detail how thoroughly compromised his position was. And because I entered at an angle, Bruce continued, you can't effectively strike me back without completely resetting your structure. Try to throw your left hand at me right now. Feel what happens. Chen tried. He attempted to bring his left hand up in a hook toward Bruce's head. But the angle was wrong. His weight was wrong. His structure was wrong. The punch had no power, no speed. And Bruce wasn't even where the punch would have gone anyway. You'd need to step back, reset your stance, redistribute your weight, bring your hands back to guard position, and then engage again, Bruce said. That entire sequence takes about 2 seconds. I could strike 6 times in 2 seconds from this position. He stepped back, and Chen nearly stumbled. He'd been so focused on the demonstration, so mentally engaged with what Bruce was explaining, that he hadn't realized how much his weight had been committed forward. Without Bruce's positioning there to define the space, Chen's balance was completely off. Chen caught himself, reset his stance, and just stood there, breathing hard, staring at Bruce with an expression that was part awe, part confusion, part something that looked almost like relief. Holy hell. Someone whispered from the circle of watching bodyguards. The voice was hushed, reverent almost. The way people speak when they've witnessed something that challenges their understanding of reality. Bruce turned to address the whole room. His expression was open, friendly, without any trace of ego or superiority. He looked like someone who genuinely enjoyed sharing knowledge. "This isn't magic," he said. "It's not supernatural. It's not a secret technique that only a chosen few can learn. It's just understanding human biomechanics, psychology, and combat at a level where everything becomes clear. Let me show you something else." He gestured to the Muay Thai fighter who'd tried earlier. "Come at me with your best combination. The one you're most confident in. The one that works most reliably for you in actual fights." The Muay Thai fighter hesitated for just a moment, then nodded and stepped forward. He set his stance, weight distributed carefully, hands up in the traditional Muay Thai guard position, elbows tight to protect the body. He launched his combination. Low kick to Bruce's lead leg, immediately followed by a powerful right cross aimed at Bruce's head, then a left hook to the body, finishing with a knee strike aimed at the midsection. It was fast, technically perfect, thrown with good rhythm and proper weight transfer. The kind of four-strike combination that devastated opponents. The kind of sequence that had won him fights in Bangkok's underground tournaments. Bruce demonstrated the same principle Chen had just experienced, but faster, more fluidly. He moved into the low kick rather than away from it, stepping at an angle that made his shin meet the kick on the hardest part of his leg, while simultaneously positioning his body outside the line of the follow-up punch. The right cross passed by Bruce's head, not because Bruce pulled his head back, but because he'd changed the angle of engagement. He wasn't where the punch was designed to land anymore. The left hook to the body found nothing but air, because Bruce had pivoted. His torso rotated just enough that the hook traveled through space his body had occupied a fraction of a second earlier. And the knee strike, which should have been devastating if it landed, couldn't generate power, because Bruce had controlled the distance so precisely. He was close enough that the fighter couldn't extend his leg properly, couldn't get his hips into the strike. The knee came up but had nowhere to go, no power behind it. Bruce ended up positioned at an angle to the fighter's side, his hand positioned near the fighter's throat, the same way he'd done with Chen. "From here," Bruce said, his voice calm and instructional. "Throat strike ends the fight, or elbow to the temple, or sweep the supporting leg. Look at where your weight is. You're balanced entirely on your left leg right now, because your right leg is still recovering from that knee strike. If I swept you right now, you'd go down hard." He stepped back. The Muay Thai fighter stood there, processing his expression, showing the same mixture of awe and confusion that Chen's had shown. "Again," Bruce said, "this isn't about being faster or stronger. It's about understanding the geometry of combat so deeply that you see opportunities others don't. Every attack creates openings. It has to. When you commit to a strike, you temporarily compromise your structure. Your body has to prioritize the attack, which means other areas become vulnerable. Most people don't notice these openings, because they're busy trying to land their attacks or defend against them. But if you understand the patterns, the openings become obvious." A third demonstration. Bruce gestured to the judo practitioner, the heavyweight who specialized in throws. "Try to take me down. Any technique you want." The grappler approached more cautiously than the strikers had. Grapplers tended to be more methodical, more patient. He worked for position, trying to get his hands on Bruce's gi top, looking for grips that would allow him to execute a throw. But Bruce's positioning was too good. Every time the grappler reached for a grip, Bruce's arm wasn't quite where it was expected to be. Not pulling away dramatically, just existing in a slightly different position than the grappler's muscle memory anticipated. Finally, the grappler committed to a technique. He shot for a double leg takedown, dropping his level, reaching for both of Bruce's legs, driving forward with his shoulder into Bruce's hips. It was a fundamental wrestling takedown, one of the most reliable techniques in grappling. Bruce sprawled, his hips shot back away from the grappler's reach, his legs extending behind him, his weight dropping onto the grappler's shoulders. The sprawl was technically perfect. Textbook defense. But what happened next was what made everyone watching inhale sharply. While the grappler was still committed to the failed takedown, his head down, his arms extended, his structure completely compromised. Bruce's hand snapped forward and stopped half an inch from the grappler's eye. Just stopped there. Frozen, his index and middle fingers extended, formed into a shape that would have struck the eye directly if he'd continued the motion another half inch. If this was real, Bruce said quietly, you'd be blind in one eye right now. Maybe both eyes, depending on the angle and force. And eye injuries in a fight don't just hurt, they fundamentally change what's possible. You can't judge distance properly with one eye. You can't track multiple opponents. Your depth perception is gone. The grappler froze completely, his face inches from Bruce's hand, his body locked in the failed takedown position. From this position, Bruce continued, because you overcommitted to the takedown, you have no defense. Your head is down, your hands are extended and empty, your neck is exposed. I could have kneed your face as you came in. Could have struck the back of your neck when you ducked, right here. His other hand moved to hover over the back of the grappler's neck, at the base of the skull. Could have stomped your knee from the side. Your left knee is extended and bearing all your weight right now. Could have sprawled and then taken your back for a choke. Could have done 10 different things before you even registered them. Bruce stepped back and helped the grappler stand up. The man's face showed shock, respect, and a fundamental recalibration of his understanding of grappling range. This is what I mean about real fights being easier than demonstrations, Bruce said to the room. In a demonstration, I'm being careful. I'm stopping my strikes before contact. I'm showing you what's possible without actually hurting you. In a real fight, I wouldn't need to be careful. The strikes would land. The opportunities I'm showing you would be exploited fully. The fight would be over in seconds. A fourth demonstration. The Wing Chun practitioner stepped forward, and Bruce showed how understanding center line control at a deep level allowed him to dominate close, range-trapping sequences. Every time the Wing Chun practitioner tried to establish control, Bruce's structure was better positioned, his sensitivity to pressure and direction was more refined, his understanding of the angles was more complete. Within seconds, Bruce had reversed the position. His hands rested lightly on the Wing Chun practitioner's arms, controlling the center line completely. Feel that? Bruce asked. Your structure is compromised from here. You're pulled slightly forward. Your weight is on your toes rather than your heels. Your elbows are away from your body. From this position, 5 targets are now open. Your eyes, your throat, your solar plexus, your groin, your knees. And you can't attack me effectively because I control your arms and therefore your structure. He released the position, and the Wing Chun practitioner stumbled back slightly, having to catch his balance. The room was completely silent now. Not the tense silence from earlier, when people were skeptical or angry or defensive. This was a different kind of silence. The silence of students who had just realized that their teacher knew far more than they'd imagined. The silence of people whose worldview had been fundamentally altered. Bruce walked to the center of the training floor. Everything I've shown you today comes down to a few core principles. First, understanding the gap between intention and action. Most people's attacks are telegraphed because they haven't eliminated that gap. Second, understanding angles and positioning. Combat is geometry. If you understand the angles, you can position yourself where you're safe and your opponent is vulnerable. Third, understanding structure and weight distribution. Every position has strengths and weaknesses. If you can read someone's structure, you know what they can and can't do from that position. He paused, looking at the faces watching him. Fourth, and perhaps most important, fighting consciously rather than automatically. Most people learn techniques and then try to apply them without thinking. But conscious fighting means you're perceiving reality in real time and responding to what's actually happening, not what you expect to happen or what you trained for. Someone asked, how long does it take to develop this level of awareness? Bruce smiled slightly. That depends on how willing you are to question everything you think you know. Some people train their whole lives and never get here because they're too attached to their style, their techniques, their identity as a particular type of fighter. Others start to grasp it within months because they're willing to let go of preconceptions and just observe reality clearly. Chen Wei raised his hand, and Bruce nodded to him. Earlier, Chen said, you said something about this being easier in real fights than in demonstrations. Can you explain that more? Bruce nodded. In a demonstration like this, I'm being careful. I'm controlling my strikes, stopping them before contact. I'm thinking about how to show principles clearly without hurting anyone. That actually requires more precision and control than a real fight. In a real fight, people are emotional. They're scared or angry or desperate. That makes them even more predictable because emotion amplifies all those telegraphs I was talking about. They commit more fully to strikes out of anger, which creates bigger openings. They make decisions based on ego rather than strategy, which makes their behavior easier to predict. And in a real fight, I wouldn't be stopping my strikes to explain things. I'd be following through, and the fight would be over very quickly. He looked at Chen specifically. You fought today with your ego engaged initially, then later with genuine curiosity. Both states made you predictable in different ways. In a real fight, most people are operating from fear or anger, and those emotional states make combat much simpler for someone who's fighting consciously. Another hand went up. One of the younger bodyguards. Can you teach us this? Bruce was quiet for a moment, considering his answer carefully. I can teach you the principles. I can show you exercises to develop sensitivity and awareness. I can help you understand the geometry and the biomechanics. But the real teaching happens through your own practice and observation. I can point at the moon, but you have to look at it yourself. I can show you the gap between intention and action, but you have to learn to perceive it in yourself and eliminate it through your own training. He looked around the room. The question isn't whether I can teach you. The question is whether you're willing to learn. And learning means being willing to question everything. To let go of techniques that don't work even if you've invested years in them. To be honest about your limitations, and to approach training with genuine curiosity rather than ego. The room was completely silent now. The demonstration was over. But the real lesson, the transformation that these men were beginning to experience, was just starting. What happened in the weeks after that demonstration became legendary in Hong Kong martial arts circles. The story spread rapidly, the way stories do in tight, knit communities. It moved from that exclusive Victoria Peak training hall to other dojos across the city. It traveled through tea houses where masters gathered to discuss philosophy and technique. It appeared in whispered conversations in Wing Chun schools, Muay Thai gyms, boxing clubs, and traditional Kung Fu academies. But like all stories that pass from mouth to mouth, it became distorted in the retelling, exaggerated, transformed into mythology. Some versions claimed Bruce Lee had defeated 10 bodyguards simultaneously in full combat. Others said he'd hospitalized someone with a single strike that was so fast nobody saw it happen. Some versions had him blindfolded. Others had him fighting multiple attackers at once while explaining philosophy. The myths grew larger, more dramatic, further from the truth with each retelling. But for those who were actually there in that training hall on that particular afternoon, what mattered wasn't the legendary narrative that would emerge. It was the genuine transformation they'd experienced firsthand. Chen Wei, the veteran bodyguard who'd openly disrespected Bruce Lee, who'd challenged him publicly, who'd essentially called him a fraud in front of his peers, became one of Bruce's most dedicated students. Not because he was forced to, not out of some humiliating obligation, but because he'd experienced something that changed him at a fundamental level. He'd been given a glimpse of a level of understanding he hadn't known existed, and once you see that, you can't unsee it. Once you know there are depths beyond what you've explored, you can't pretend you've reached the bottom. But the real lesson wasn't just about fighting techniques or martial arts mastery. Bruce gathered everyone in the training hall that same day, after the demonstrations had concluded, after people had caught their breath and begun to process what they'd witnessed. The afternoon sun was streaming through the floor, to ceiling windows now, casting long shadows across the polished teak floor. Before we go any further, Bruce began, his voice calm and measured. I want to address something important. Chen, you challenged me today out of ego, and a sense that your experience was being invalidated, and you weren't entirely wrong to feel that way. Chen looked up, surprised. He'd expected maybe some teaching about humility, maybe a lecture about respecting masters, maybe some traditional wisdom about the student-teacher relationship. He hadn't expected validation. I mean it. Bruce continued, and his expression showed he was being completely sincere. Healthy skepticism is essential in martial arts. Actually, it's essential in life. If you just accepted everything I said today, because I'm famous, because I make movies, because other people told you I was skilled, that would have been just as flawed as rejecting everything I said for the same reasons. He walked closer to the center of the room, and people instinctively formed a circle around him. This wasn't just a lecture anymore. This was something deeper. Think about it, Bruce said. If you automatically accept claims without testing them, you're not learning, you're just adopting beliefs. You become someone else's follower rather than your own authority. That's not martial arts. That's not growth. That's just compliance. Several bodyguards nodded slowly, beginning to understand where this was going. The problem today wasn't your skepticism, Chen, Bruce continued, looking directly at him. The problem was how you expressed it, and more importantly, whether you were willing to actually test your assumptions when given the opportunity. Chen nodded, his expression thoughtful. He was listening deeply now, not defensively, but with genuine openness. Here's what I've learned, Bruce said. Not just about martial arts, but about life, about growth, about mastery of anything. The moment you think you've mastered something is the moment you stop growing. The moment you decide you know everything worth knowing about a subject is the moment you become stagnant. And in combat, stagnation equals defeat. But this is true in every domain: business, relationships, art, everything. He gestured broadly to include everyone in the room. Every person here has real experience, real skill, real accomplishments. That's not in question. But if you decide your experience is complete, that you have nothing left to learn, you become frozen in place while the world continues to evolve around you. Bruce turned back to Chen. This man has 15 years of protecting people. That's valuable. That's real. He's been in situations most people will never face. He's made life or death decisions under pressure. That experience shaped him, taught him, made him effective at what he does. Chen stood a bit straighter, appreciating the acknowledgement, but, Bruce continued, those 15 years were spent deepening his understanding of certain approaches, certain techniques, certain ways of thinking about combat. He became excellent, genuinely excellent, at what he trained in. He became a specialist in a particular approach to violence and protection. Bruce paused, letting that sink in. The question isn't whether his skills are valuable. They obviously are. The question is he willing to examine the gaps in his knowledge? Is he willing to recognize that excellence in one domain doesn't automatically mean comprehensive understanding of all related domains? Chen nodded slowly. The truth of this was becoming clear to him. I thought I knew what fighting was, he said, his voice steady but thoughtful. I thought because I'd been in real situations, because I'd survived actual violence, I understood combat completely. I knew what worked and what didn't work because I'd tested it under pressure. He paused, choosing his words carefully. But I was wrong. I didn't understand combat completely. I understood one type of combat. I understood the kind of fighting I'd been exposed to, against the kinds of opponents I'd faced, using the approaches I'd been trained in. And I was so invested in that being the truth, the complete picture, that I couldn't see other possibilities. Bruce smiled, and it was a warm smile, the smile of a teacher seeing a student grasp a crucial concept. And that's exactly the transformation I hope to share with everyone here. Understanding that your truth might be incomplete isn't a weakness. It's the beginning of real growth. He started walking toward the chalkboard mounted on one wall of the training hall. Someone handed him chalk, and he began writing as he spoke. What I call Jeet Kune Do isn't actually a martial art in the traditional sense. It's not a system with set techniques and prescribed responses. It's a philosophy. A way of approaching combat, yes, but more fundamentally, a way of approaching learning itself. He wrote on the board, using no way as way, having no limitation as limitation, a traditional martial arts, Bruce said, and his tone was respectful, not dismissive. And I say this with deep respect for tradition, for history, for the wisdom of masters who came before us. Traditional martial arts often become trapped by their own forms. He turned to face the group. You learn a system. Wing Chun, Karate, Kung Fu, Muay Thai, boxing, judo, whatever, and the system becomes sacred. You spend years, sometimes decades, perfecting the forms, the techniques, the traditional approaches. You invest enormous time and energy into becoming excellent at that system. Several bodyguards were nodding. This described their own experience exactly, and there's value in that, Bruce continued. Real value. Depth of practice creates skill. Repetition creates refinement. Dedication to a system can take you very far. He paused. But here's the trap: the system becomes your identity. You're not just someone who practices Wing Chun. You become a Wing Chun fighter. You're not just someone who studies karate. You become a karateka. The style becomes inseparable from your sense of self. He wrote on the board, style identity. And when that happens, Bruce said, you become imprisoned by your own expertise. Because anything that challenges your style feels like it's challenging you personally. Any technique from outside your system feels like a threat to your identity. You become defensive rather than curious. You protect your investment rather than seeking truth. The room was completely silent. People were processing this, and you could see in their faces that it was hitting home. Many of them had built their entire professional identities around specific martial arts backgrounds. So here's the question I'm asking you to consider. Bruce said, what if, instead of being a style fighter, you became a fighter who used whatever principles worked for the situation at hand? What if your identity was based on effectiveness rather than loyalty to a system? He began demonstrating as he spoke, moving through different positions. Wing Chun taught me about structure and center line control. He showed a classic Wing Chun guard and forward pressure. Boxing taught me about footwork and efficient punching mechanics. He shifted to a boxing stance, showing head movement and rapid combinations. Fencing taught me about distance management and timing. He mimed holding a foil, showing extension and retraction. Wrestling taught me about controlling another person's structure and weight distribution. He stopped and faced the group again. I didn't reject these arts. I absorbed what was useful from each. But I didn't limit myself to any single system's assumptions or restrictions. Bruce wrote on the board, absorb what is useful, reject what is useless, add what is specifically your own. This is the core principle, he said. Not loyalty to tradition for tradition's sake. Not preservation of forms because they're historical. But honest evaluation of what actually works, what's actually effective, what actually serves the goal of efficient combat. He looked at Chen Wei specifically. You trained in Wing Chun. You studied Western boxing. You incorporated judo. You were already doing this, synthesizing from multiple sources. But you stopped. You decided at some point that you'd learned enough, that your combination of skills was complete. That was the trap. Chen nodded, understanding. I became comfortable. I found approaches that worked for the situations I faced, and I stopped looking beyond them. Exactly, Bruce said. And comfort is the enemy of growth. Over the next several weeks, Bruce continued working with this group of elite bodyguards whenever his film schedule allowed. The sessions became legendary among those who attended, but they weren't just fighting classes. They became philosophical discussions, psychological explorations, examinations of how human beings learn and grow, and become trapped by their own expertise. Bruce taught them to question everything, including what he taught them. If something I show you doesn't work for your body type, your situation, your needs, he would say repeatedly, then don't use it. Discard it. I'm not giving you a religion to follow. I'm not asking for disciples. I'm giving you tools and principles to discover your own truth. He showed them how most martial arts techniques could be simplified, stripped of unnecessary flourishes that had been added over generations. Every extra motion is a wasted fraction of a second and an opportunity for your opponent. Economy of motion is everything. The shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. That's not just geometry, that's combat strategy. He taught them about range and timing. Most fighters think about distance as something static. You're either in range or out of range. But distance is dynamic, constantly changing. If you understand how to manipulate distance and timing simultaneously, you can make someone think they're in range when they're not, or think they're safe when they're actually in perfect range for your counter. He demonstrated psychological warfare in combat. Most fights are won before the first punch is thrown. If you can control the psychological space, if you can make your opponent doubt themselves, question their approach, feel off balance mentally, the physical confrontation becomes much simpler. He showed them how to use calmness as a weapon. When someone attacks you with anger or fear, they expect you to respond with the same emotional state. Your calmness disrupts their expectations. It creates doubt. They start wondering why you're not afraid. What you know that they don't, whether they've miscalculated something fundamental. Chen Wei, in particular, underwent a complete transformation during these weeks. He started attending every session Bruce offered, often arriving early to help set up and staying late to ask questions. He began keeping a training journal, documenting not just techniques but insights, questions, observations about his own psychological patterns. He started studying not just Bruce's techniques but his philosophy. He read books on Taoism, on Zen Buddhism, on Western philosophy, on psychology, anything that might help him understand the principles Bruce was demonstrating. And he began applying these lessons to his bodyguard work. 6 months after that first demonstration, Chen would credit Bruce's teachings with saving his life. He'd been protecting a wealthy client during an attempted robbery. 3 attackers, all armed, 1 with a knife, 2 with what appeared to be improvised weapons. The old Chen, the Chen from before meeting Bruce, would have tried to fight through them using strength and aggression, would have tried to dominate through force, to overwhelm through commitment and technique. But the new Chen saw the situation differently. He understood angles and positioning in a way he hadn't before. He understood how to use the environment, furniture, walls, doorways, to control how many attackers could engage him simultaneously. He understood how to move in ways that made the attackers interfere with each other's attacks. He used his calmness to create doubt in his attackers. While they were emotional, aggressive, acting on adrenaline and desperation, Chen remained composed. That composure made them hesitate, made them wonder if he knew something they didn't, if he had backup arriving, if their plan was more flawed than they'd realized. And most importantly, he understood that his job wasn't to defeat the attackers, it was to protect his client. So he created escape routes, controlled the distance and positioning so his client could safely exit, and then extracted himself. Not a single punch was thrown. Not a single strike landed by either side. Chen simply understood the geometry of the situation so well, controlled the psychological space so effectively, that the attackers never got the angles they needed, and eventually fled when their window of opportunity closed. Bruce didn't just teach me to fight better. Chen would tell his colleagues afterward, his voice carrying genuine awe and gratitude. He taught me that the moment I thought I was done learning was the moment I became vulnerable. In combat, in protection work, in life, in everything. He paused, thinking about how to express what he'd learned. For 15 years I built expertise. I became really good at specific things, but I confused expertise with completeness. I thought being an expert meant I'd learned everything worth learning. Bruce showed me that expertise is just the beginning. It's the foundation that allows you to see how much more there is to learn. But the biggest change in Chen wasn't tactical or technical. It was philosophical. He stopped viewing himself as someone who'd mastered protection work. He stopped seeing himself as an expert who'd figured everything out. Instead, he became a perpetual student. Someone who was constantly learning, adapting, improving, questioning his assumptions, testing his beliefs, remaining open to new understanding. Bruce told me something that changed everything. Chen would say in his later years, when he was teaching his own students. He said, "I'm not teaching you anything. I'm just helping you explore yourself." That statement seemed simple, but it was profound. He wasn't claiming to have all the answers. He was claiming to have a method for finding answers. This was the attitude that had transformed Chen and those other bodyguards during their weeks of training with Bruce. Bruce didn't claim ultimate knowledge. He claimed a process, a way of approaching learning that was based on honest self-observation, rigorous testing, and willingness to abandon what didn't work even if you'd invested years in it. The bodyguards, these hard men who'd built identities around being elite fighters, found themselves engaged in philosophical discussions that went far beyond martial arts. They talked about the nature of conflict, about ego and identity, about fear and confidence, about the difference between real growth and the illusion of growth. Training sessions that started with physical techniques often ended with conversations about life, about how the principles Bruce was teaching applied to everything. Business decisions, relationships, personal development, understanding yourself and others. Chen Wei kept a detailed journal during this period. One entry, written about 3 weeks after that first demonstration, read, "Today I understood something profound that I don't think I can fully articulate yet. But I need to try. I spent 15 years becoming a weapon. I trained my body to deliver force, to absorb impact, to end confrontations through superior technique and conditioning. I was proud of this. I built my identity around being dangerous, being capable, being someone who could handle violence." Bruce spent his life becoming water. I didn't understand what this meant at first. It sounded like mystical nonsense, like poetic language that martial artists use to sound wise. But now I'm beginning to grasp it. A weapon has one purpose. It does one thing very well. It destroys, it damages, it ends things through force. Water has infinite applications. It can flow gently or crash with devastating power. It can fit any container, adapt to any obstacle, find paths through any barrier. It's soft enough to drink and powerful enough to carve canyons through stone. I confused hardness with strength. I thought being rigid, being committed to specific techniques and approaches, being unyielding in my methods, I thought that was strength. But true strength is adaptability. True strength is being able to change approaches when situations demand it. True strength is remaining soft and flexible until the moment force is required, then delivering that force efficiently and returning to softness. I'm beginning to see that everything I thought I knew about combat was incomplete. Not wrong. My techniques work, my training is valid, my experience is real, but incomplete. Like someone who's learned to paint with only primary colors and doesn't realize that mixing them creates infinite possibilities. Years later, long after Bruce's death in 1973, Chen would establish his own training philosophy for protection specialists. He called it Flowing Guard, a name that deliberately echoed Bruce's water metaphor. The system combined traditional bodyguard tactics with Bruce's philosophical approach. It taught protectors to be adaptive rather than rigid, aware rather than automatic, economical rather than excessive, and perpetually learning rather than assuming their training was complete. Chen always credited Bruce Lee, not just as a martial artist, not just as a teacher of fighting techniques, but as the person who showed him that expertise without humility was just sophisticated ignorance. Bruce could have humiliated me that day, Chen told students decades later, his voice still carrying emotion when he spoke about it. He had every right to. I disrespected him publicly. I challenged his credibility. I essentially called him a fraud in front of everyone, and he was fully capable of making me look foolish, of hurting me if he'd wanted to, of crushing my ego in ways I wouldn't have recovered from. He paused, making sure his students understood what he was saying. But instead, he showed me something more valuable than victory. He showed me that proving someone wrong isn't nearly as powerful as helping them grow. He could have won that confrontation in ways that made me his enemy for life. Instead, he won it in a way that made me his student. That's a completely different kind of power, the power to transform rather than just defeat. Chen's eyes would get distant when he told this story, seeing that training hall in his memory, feeling again that moment when his fist had been stopped an inch from Bruce's nose, and he'd realized how completely his understanding had been shattered. He taught me that day that real mastery isn't about proving you're better than others. It's about understanding yourself in reality at such a deep level that you don't need to prove anything. The proof is in the effortless effectiveness. The proof is in making difficult things look simple. The proof is in remaining calm while others panic, in seeing clearly while others are confused, in knowing what to do while others are guessing. What transformation in your own life has challenged everything you thought you knew? Have you ever had a moment where expertise became a barrier rather than a bridge? If you found this story valuable, share which lesson resonated most with you in the comments. Your insights help us create content that matters to you.